My name is Mike Gallo, and today I'm going to talk about the importance of breaking the stigma behind seeking treatment for mental illness. Mental illness affects almost half the population. The National Comorbidity Survey estimates that lifetime prevalence rates for mental illness are as high as 46.4%. And the National Institute for Mental Health has determined that fewer than 40% of those with serious mental illness receive adequate treatment. Chances are you or someone you know has been affected by some form of mental illness at some point in time. My family certainly has. Two members of my family, both second cousins, lost their battle with depression and took their own lives. Tragedies like that may be preventable. Research shows a large piece of the puzzle is the role society plays in the stigmatization of those with mental illness. Pescasolido and Martin, research for the Annual Review of Sociology, defines stigmatization as a social process embedded in social relationships that devalues through conferring labels and stereotyping. Examples of stigmatization include the thoughts, "This person is defective. I wouldn't want them as a neighbor. My coworkers will reject me." Or actions such as passing up a more qualified candidate because they are perceived as having mental illness. In a 2015 research study by Pescasolido and Martin, respondents in 16 countries were given a description of an individual with schizophrenia, but no labels were used. The study found that more than 60% of those surveyed believed the individual should not teach children, would not want the individual as an in-law, considered the individual to be unpredictable and likely to be violent to themselves, and were unwilling to allow the individual to care for their children. According to Pescasolido's 2013 research, many people consider those with mental illness to be less competent, more irresponsible, more dangerous, and more unpredictable. There has been extensive research conducted on why people with mental illness fail to seek treatment. The National Institute for Mental Health published such a study that found 72% of those that fail to seek treatment do so because of the stigma associated with mental illness, citing financial barriers and perceived lack of effectiveness as other less significant factors. But why does stigma play such a central role in the failure to seek treatment? Modern researchers view stigma as an interactive social model, with mechanisms similar to racial discrimination. Culture and society play a major role in determining what is considered normal and acceptable. The pressures to conform lead many to pretend that they are normal. The attempt to conceal one's mental illness very often results in not seeking treatment. And according to Butcher, Hooley, and Maneka, the clinicians that wrote Abnormal Psychology, many people who receive a psychiatric diagnosis suffer from self-image problems as a result, which may reinforce their symptoms. The pressure to conform comes from individuals and employers. Corrigan and Watson point out in a study for World Psychiatry that fear leads to avoidance. Employers do not want persons with mental illness nearby, so they do not hire them. But what are the consequences of stigma? The CDC reports that in 2014, there were 43,000 deaths by suicide nationwide. That is roughly one suicide every 13 minutes. And of those suicides, the University of Washington School of Social Work reports that more than 90% have a diagnosable mental disorder. The problem affects campuses with equal weight. According to the CDC's report on Suicide Facts at a Glance 2015, 13.6% of students made a plan about how they would commit suicide last year. Current news is filled with accounts of fatal police shootings. According to a report from the Office of Research and Public Affairs, published by the Treatment Advocacy Center, people with untreated mental illness are 16 times more likely to be killed during a police encounter than other civilians stopped by law enforcement. And individuals with untreated mental illness are involved in as many as half of all fatal police shootings. There are also physiological risk factors associated with mental illness. Pratt and colleagues found that depression is a risk factor for the development of coronary heart disease. Research has also demonstrated a relationship between phobic anxiety and increased risk for sudden cardiac death. Rosansky and colleagues found that people that have a relatively small social network or consider themselves to have very little emotional support are more likely to develop coronary heart disease over time. Anxiety disorders are also associated with an increased prevalence of hypertension, cardiovascular disease, chronic pain, asthma, and irritable bowel syndrome. In addition to the health risks, people with untreated mental illness are robbed of the opportunities that define a quality life: good jobs, safe housing, satisfactory health care, and affiliation with a diverse group of people, according to Corrigan and Watson. As for eliminating or reducing the stigma that drives people to not seek treatment, research has shown that education does not work. Having knowledge of mental illness does not make others more accepting, according to a 2010 study conducted by Pascasolido and colleagues. Protest also has no effect, according to Corrigan and colleagues. So how do we alter the stigma landscape? Stigma is enacted in social relationships, making inclusion a key to destigmatization, according to Pascasolido and colleagues. But by its very nature, the interactive mechanisms that underlie it, it represents a double-edged sword. The more individuals pretend to be normal to fit in, the more they self-stigmatize. As the social mechanisms that drive racism are similar to those that produce the stigmatization of mental illness, the underlying fear of those that are perceived as being defective must be effectively extinguished. But much as discrimination is resistant to social change, there remain questions about the feasibility of such an endeavor. Continuing research will be necessary to devise effective solutions to this major health challenge. I have talked about stigma, its nature and causes, its consequences, as well as avenues for further research. I hope that I have been able to highlight this important health issue that impacts all of us. Thank you for your attention.